We'll now move on to our next session in the Agility in Governance Forum. This is focused on disruptive institutions that are really remarkable examples of agile governance. We're very lucky to have two incredible speakers with us today. Sahia Ahmed, CEO of Regulatory and Governance, Dubai Economy and Tourism from the UAE. And we have Christian Bogatu, Innovation Manager at German Federal Agency for Disruptive Innovation, or SPRIND. I hope I pronounced that right.
Absolutely right.
From Germany. Sahia, if I can start with you. I spent some time with Sahia yesterday. It was like being with a rock star, because literally in the 10 minutes I spent with her, everyone who passed by stopped to say hello and check in with her. Sahia, if I understood correctly, VARA was launched last year in March. And you've just published your regulations pretty recently, and what a journey. Would be great for us to hear the origin story of how VARA came about.
Thank you very much, and thanks for being here. So VARA is the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority that's set up by the government of Dubai. It's the first of its kind virtual asset regulator in the world. The journey really started 2021 when we started looking in Dubai at areas of how we can propel economic growth coming out of the pandemic. And we looked at future economies, and obviously the virtual digital asset space was a significant part of that. At that time, you had $1.5 trillion worth of crypto, which now is around a third, given the recent crypto winter episodes. And you have about 500 million people that have digital wallets. So it was clearly an area to look at, but also an area that governments were really struggling with to regulate for a number of reasons. Mainly because this is decentralized finance, DeFi, versus traditional finance. And most of the regulators came from a traditional finance background. So they were looking at regulation from the perspective of the TradFi lens. And the regulators themselves consisted of people that came from TradFi. So everything that they were trying to base on were regulations in an existing framework, putting regulations on top of a foundation that actually wasn't really built for DeFi. And so that was one challenge. The other challenge was that there wasn't really a perspective on the innovation in the space. This is a very fast-paced moving space in terms of crypto assets, in terms of the players that are establishing the exchanges and are looking at this and how it develops. So you not only had confusion in terms of how are we regulating, what are we regulating, but also who should be regulating. Because you had discussions between central banks, securities and commodities authorities, and different parts of the world, everybody looking at it differently. So we looked at it from a different perspective. We said, let's start with a clean sheet of paper, and let's actually look at this and see how we collaborate with the ecosystem. How do we get the input from the ecosystem to understand what do they want? And when we started speaking to the VASPs, the virtual asset service providers, to the investors, to the funds that were in this space, we realized that the issue was that everybody was focused on the technology and the product, and they were not really focused on the innovation. So our perspective was, let's look at this. Let's work closely with the innovators and help them drive what we put into the regulation versus the other way around. It was really sort of turning the concept of government, industry innovating, and then government following onto its head, where we thought, you know what, why don't we innovate as government here, and then have people come to the innovation. So we formed VARA March last year. In parallel, we started all of our discussions, not only aligning international stakeholders, making sure that we were compliant in terms of what we were putting forward for financial stability, to ensure that we had all of the pieces in place with respect to FATF requirements, anti-money laundering, and the international space, but also locally integrating with local and federal regulators. It's a new area which a lot of people just did not have a lot of understanding about, so there was capacity building. And alignment with the existing legal framework, which we've seen be a challenge in other markets, was absolutely critical. And then working with the industry to actually issue the regulations that we issued last week.
If I can go back to something you mentioned about not regulating the product or technology, but regulating the activity, or the application, if you like. In my mind, it's very much sort of linked to what is the role of government. It would be great to hear, why is this distinction important? Why is the distinction between what you regulate is important?
I mean, we were having a quick chat before, talking about what is really the role of government, our perspective, and this is more about the culture of government in Dubai and the UAE, is business first and innovation first. And as opposed to saying, okay, let's look at the problem and let's see how we can regulate the problem, let's actually look at how we can innovate and encourage the industry whilst having the right guardrails in place so that we are controlling the risks, so that you have the freedom for the innovators to be able to continue to propel things forward in the space. You cannot put a hold on the technology. You're always going to be playing catch up if you're trying to regulate the technology, because the technology is changing. You cannot regulate the product, because there is always going to be new products. And again, you'll be playing catch up. The way to do it really is to make sure that you have the guardrails on the activity. And at the same time, of course, not to ignore that now you have fantastic tools to monitor as well. I mean, you can monitor the blockchain. And the reputable players are actually wanting you to do that. They're saying, you know what, we will open things up for you. We will allow you to monitor, but give us the freedom to be able to innovate.
Thank you, Sahia. Christian, now we spoke a little bit about just the history of innovation in Europe and the links to prosperity and so on. Tell us about why did SPRIND come about in existence? What's the vision? What's the mission of SPRIND?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for having me here and meeting great people like you guys and listening to what you're saying. You can maybe the contrast of what you said. In Germany, we try to regulate more, and here you try to encourage business. And I think this was one of the reasons why SPRIND has been put in place, because we also want to encourage business, we want to encourage innovation, disruptive innovation. And the idea is basically Europe and Germany was like in pharmaceuticals, it was created in Germany, but now recently over the last decades, not much innovation is happening there. And that's why the German government and Angela Merkel back then, she had the idea to create SPRIND as an effort to foster innovation, disruptive innovation, things that can really change the world for a better place. And for 3 years now, we are in existence, and I would say maybe a year and a half that we're really operationally, and we're already supporting around 50 projects, sector agnostic. And it's actually, for me, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm also working in the venture capital space, and now recently started with SPRIND, and I've never done something cooler than what I'm doing today, because every day I speak to really brilliant people that can change the world, and I have a multi-billion euro budget to help them. It's just heaven, right?
Christian's optimism is infectious, as you can see. But so tell me, governments usually are inherently risk averse, often. Not all of them, but most of them.
Not all of them. Just,
yeah. How do you balance that with SPRIND's mission, which is basically to be ready to fail and invest in things that are unproven, cutting edge? How does that play out in day-to-day? What are the challenges?
Well, I think that the important thing is that we are detached from government. So we have our budget, we have our clear mission given by the government, but then we are absolutely free to operate. So we can choose the projects that we are supporting, And that is probably the main important ingredient to make SPRIND and agencies like ours successful.
Yeah. Sahia, just moving gears to a little bit about keeping your team equipped and up to speed with the topics that VARA deals with, or licenses that you might have to give. What are some of the ways in which you make sure that your team and also your counterparts sitting in other departments understand your work and have the awareness of what you're trying to regulate?
I talked about collaboration, really. That's sort of my key word for today at all levels. Upskilling in this area, introducing this into the space of financial literacy so people start to understand what virtual assets are when it comes to investment is absolutely key. We have spent a lot of time working to really lift up the level of understanding, and that's not just within government and locally, it crosses borders. This is an industry which cannot be regulated just by one jurisdiction because of the nature of the technology. It crosses borders. In order for the regulation to work, it has to be able to cross borders and be regulated equally. So we've worked hard to make sure that there's a minimum baseline. And we're now talking to other regulators to say, you know what, here we are, we've got our regulations, here's the minimum baseline, take a look at it, let's discuss and collaborate and talk about interoperability, passporting, so that we can lift up the level of experience, knowledge, sharing. There's been quite a lot of talk since yesterday, in the last couple of days, on deglobalization, and we still have a lot of interdependence. And in this space, absolutely, because we want to make sure it doesn't become a race to the bottom, where people are jumping from jurisdiction to another to see where they can play arbitrage and find the easiest place to do business, and at the same time creating financial instability because there's a lack of awareness and knowledge amongst investors. So really it's collaboration, but it's also increasing the level of awareness, which is one of the pieces of the mandate of VARA, not just locally in Dubai, across and outward.
One of the refreshing things for myself when I came to the forum, to the summit, is this just talk about global interdependence, because quite often you end up hearing about domestic resilience, domestic and so on. So it's great to hear that theme come up in various pieces. Christian, in your work, you also work across geographies and boundaries. Can you give us an example of how you support innovations?
Absolutely. So it's German taxpayer money, but we spend it also outside of Germany. For example, we create challenges. So where we say, this is an area where there's not much innovation that we see, there's not enough happening, then we create a challenge, for example, carbon to value, where we say carbon capture is done all over the world, but it's much better if you create a product from the carbon capture where you can utilize it, where you create value based on it. And that's why we created the Carbon to Value Challenge, and anyone in Europe and Israel and I think the United States as well, and soon also in Asia, can apply. And then we also support these projects around the world with up to 4 million, because it obviously also helps collaboration, right? Because German teams will then also benefit from teams that exchange ideas with the local teams. And it helps everyone in the world, basically, if there's a project that can sequester carbon dioxide. And it doesn't only help if it's a German team, but it could be from anywhere. So that's why we spend the money also abroad. Yeah. And I think that's super important to do that, yeah. To foster collaboration.
Can you share a few more examples of some of the recent things that you've backed, just to sort of show the breadth of, and perhaps starting with just the various industries and sectors that you cover?
So there's broad topics like energy, for example, super important. We started a challenge in long-term energy storage, or in the carbon to value challenge, where we have one project that creates carbon negative concrete. So not just reducing a little bit the CO2 emission while you create the concrete, the cement, but basically changing the chemistry so that the cement is actually getting carbonating, so it takes out CO2 from the air instead of emitting it. And concrete is basically producing 8% of global CO2 emissions. And if you change that and have the concrete capture CO2, that's a game changer for the whole world. So that's one of the projects that we're supporting. Then we are building the world's largest, tallest windmill. It's as big as the Eiffel Tower in Paris, 380 meters high. And actually, I was talking to you earlier, if we can do it in Dubai faster, I think we could. So if there's anyone who would like to build the tallest windmill, it's not very easy, actually. And the guy who invented this is 93 years old. So we have inventors that are obviously coming from school, 18 years old, up to 93-year-old people who come to SPRIND, and we support them. And so I'd love to create this windmill here in Dubai, maybe even before COP28. That would be a landmark. And another project is creating hydrogen directly from the sun without photovoltaic and electrolysis, but directly taking water and sun and a catalyzer and creating hydrogen out of it. So this could be the third way of green energy besides wind and solar. Then there's a project super relevant also for this region where they are ionizing the air and spraying little water, so no chemicals, just water and ionized water into the air. And then if there's a humidity level above 40%, which is easily the case also here, at certain conditions, then it enhances the rainfall. So you can basically create rainfall out of very little humidity already. We don't know if it's working, by the way. All of the technologies that we support, it could be a failure, and that's part of our philosophy also. But we have to try, we have to work on it, and if it works out, then it will change the world, right? And yeah, I could go on, like in biology, we do a lot of synthetic biology projects, metabolic engineering, where you create little bacteria that can produce metals even, right? It doesn't need to be organic, it can be inorganic. So really interesting things. If you watch Star Trek, the replicator, that's something we will soon create a challenge on, where you just, I mean, in future you want the water, you just press a button and out comes a water and you fill it with waste, for example. I mean, this is really like not tomorrow, this is future.
This is officially my favorite panel. You brought Star Trek into the conversation. Like, this is, you're winning, hands down. Christian, but you know, what was interesting when we spoke was the specific stage at which you come in into a venture. Can you just tell us a bit more about what stage, but also why, not before or later that?
So there's lots of money in very early basic research around the world. And there's lots of money, like I work with Euraseo, the largest VC firm in continental Europe. We have 7 billion assets under management in tech. There's lots of money if it's like close to commercialization or in the growth area where you actually already know, okay, perfect, I do A and B comes out, wonderful, I do more of A and then more of B comes out. This is the world of the venture capital firms that I'm working in part-time, basically. But with SPRIND, we do A and we have no idea what's happening. It could be B, C, D, or whatever. It could be like disrupting the whole world, or it could completely fail. And in that stage, it's super critical to have an independent, obviously you cannot support perpetuum mobiles that really don't work, right? You need to have the team in place that can actually see if this is a good technology and if it's going to be potentially successful, but we don't know at the end, and that's where we found that there's not much money flowing, so that's why SPRIND exists and agencies like ours.
Thank you. Sahia, you know, we talked about the importance of having political will behind creating risky and bold ventures like this. Can you talk about the unique context here in your case?
I mean, I think the unique context here is that we're extremely fortunate to have great leadership in the UAE. And it's leadership that follows with the vision and then the ability to act. And the ability to act really is a perspective that we not only have this vision of what we're looking for, but that anything is possible. And we hear that regularly, that risk is a good thing. It's not something to shy away from. And in fact, one of the things that His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum says is that one of the biggest risks is actually the fear of taking risk. And if we're not taking those risks as government, we are not developing. The political and the action are aligned here. There is no asymmetry between them, and I think that is unique. So it's the leadership, the vision of the leadership. But then lastly, I think it's also this perspective of culture in government. You know, people talk a lot about corporate culture, and there is so much written about corporate culture. There is very little that people talk about in culture in government. Yeah. And I think that the leadership here drives a culture that is akin to healthy corporate culture, where you're not just looking at the greater good of the community from an economic perspective, but also from a social perspective, and it's absolutely holistic. So you're looking towards complete prosperity, and that is driven through everything that we do in government.
I'm curious about the team that you put together, for VARA. Was it more about reskilling existing individuals? Was it about finding, and the question I'm asking to be direct is about sort of legacy of certain professions, especially finance and so on. So how did you manage that?
Completely new team, completely new organization, huge learning curve for a lot of us like myself. I mean, I'm part of the core team that formed the organization and sit on the board of the organization now. But we hired a new team, and for those of us that were part of putting it together, it was a huge learning curve. Now the team exists of people that actually are coming from the digital asset ecosystem. So people that are either have been in the investment space or in the technology space or even in the compliance space. So we've made sure that whoever is joining us has that experience. It's not really people that have the government experience. We have the government experience. And we're able to help translate that. A lot of this has been a translation journey, translating government speak to the technology speak and vice versa. And that's what the organization is now built of.
This is perfect. This is exactly my experience at SPRIND. We also have the people in our organization that understand the government, yeah, and those that understand the technology. So my colleague Tom, for example, he invented Apple Pay, like crazy, intelligent, bright people. And if you pair them with the people who understand the government, then I think you can really create something big. And if there's vision and leadership, so
perfect combination.
Mashallah.
So talking about sort of people outside your teams, because I'm assuming there's also a need to bring them along, if not sort of entirely, but keeping them abreast of what you're doing, why is it important, and so on. Can you tell us a bit more about how you do that? Or are you seen as this team that sits and does really exciting work, but not sort of, it's an arm's distance? How does that work?
It can't work at an arm's distance. Nobody is an island. And it goes back to the alignment and collaboration piece, is even as a regulator, we sit within an existing legislative constitutional framework. We have to fit within that. From an international perspective, there are international compliance pieces that we have to fit into. So we can't be isolated. And I think it's those of us that are the government guys on the side of the organization that are then responsible for making sure that all of that is aligned, and that those conversations continue. I think there is always a risk that those conversations stop at some point. It has to be an ongoing journey. It can't just be that now you're in place and then those conversations stop.
Christian, is it the same in your?
Well, I think you have to involve the whole ecosystem. So, for example, there's a super brilliant researcher in Germany who's creating a new antiviral drug that you spray in the nose and it basically cuts the RNA of the virus. It's not working yet, but she invented it. And then, but she necessarily doesn't want to be an entrepreneur. She's a researcher, right? So she wants to be a scientific advisor of the company, but she needs people with a vision who are like tomorrow Elon Musk is coming here, I learned. Like these kind of people who can really drive change and create companies and get like a team together to really create unicorns and large companies. So we started a co-founder program where we match the scientific people with the business people. And if that happens, actually, then there can be really disruptive innovation, successful innovation. Because I think in Germany, we're very good at the science and the technology, but not so good at execution. And success means, I would say, 1% tech and 99% execution. So we need to be much better at that part, not just look at the technology and support the technology development, but also the execution. And that's also the role of SPRIND. That's why we have this co-founder program, and we help encourage really company building, business building. Right? In Germany, we had a chat before, you said, oh, we want to encourage business. And in Germany, we want to encourage regulation, right, usually. So that's different. We have to change that mindset. And we can only do that collaboratively with everyone involved, the government, the ecosystem, the entrepreneurs, the venture capital ecosystem, and obviously the technology ecosystem.
And I think that's why forums like these are so important. I mean, we're 10 years in now to these conversations. And each year at this forum, we have these conversations. You have a mix of the ecosystem that's speaking. You have government people, you have people from a different background that have, investment background, you have the Elon Musks. And I think these conversations really are absolutely critical to embracing that.
Absolutely.
I called it a brain spa in my Twitter feed yesterday, but coming here to the forum, it's so inspiring in terms of hearing all the different viewpoints. One question for both of you, given the power of hindsight, if there were people in the room thinking about or looking at setting up something like SPRIND or VARA from scratch, what are some of the critical success factors that you would tell them to keep in mind from day one?
I think the first one is understand the problem. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Speak to as many people that know better than you do. And that is the entire industry, the private sector, the government stakeholders as well. So going back to the ecosystem. And learn as much as you can with respect to how do you then solve the problem. And then the last one, which I think is really the most important, is courage. It requires a lot of courage to do something that is different, that has not been done before. And we're seeing this even in the way that we've issued our regulations, is that we've issued regulations, we're continuing the dialogue with the industry and the government players to tweak that as we go along. Because if you're going to wait for it to be perfect, you'll be waiting, and the technology will continue to evolve, and you'll never quite get there. So you have to have the courage to say, you know what, we're going live. And then we develop, we tweak, we improve as we go along.
Perfect. Absolutely, I can fully underline that, and maybe add the significant budget. So it needs to be a multi-billion euro budget for people. So if you talk to Germans, most people don't know SPRIND at all, right? And if I tell them, so we have a multi-billion euro budget, they're all like, what? I want to talk to you. Like, what is this? Right? And if I would say, like, yeah, we have a 1 million euro budget, that would be irrelevant. So you need to have relevance. but the courage and the leadership on top of the organization. So the team needs to be there, and they just need to be not afraid of change. And most people in government, I need to be careful what I'm saying, but a lot of people are afraid of change, and they're actually combating it. So there's probably a lot of people in the government who hate what we are doing, because we're changing the status quo. And you need to be not afraid of doing that, and only then can it succeed, I think. And you need to be detached from government bodies, right? So.
Thank you both. It's been just. I'm gonna try and attempt and summarize what struck me from both of your conversations. One is, I think, just the importance of having a very bold vision for something like this. In your case, the link to the commitment of doubling the economy. In your case, bringing innovation and prosperity. Just having a shared big vision. Second one, just the importance of bringing interdisciplinary folks in the room, whether new or existing, but just kind of really honing in on each other's capabilities. I love the idea of constantly learning, and so knowing that you don't know everything from day one, so being ready to learn from everything that you're doing. The ecosystem approach, I think in each of our conversations you've spoken about so many different teams and departments and bodies that you're working with. But last, and I think I'll definitely highlight that, it's also having incredible leadership. I think you'll agree with me, both your energy, your passion for what you're doing is just so, you can just feel it. And that's such a great trait to have something for a bold venture like this. But thank you both for making the time. Thank you. I hope you leave as inspired as I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much.